concludes our 20 of the 24 hours to save AIDS research live stream. I'm now very happy to hand over to Jim Pickett, who I probably don't need to introduce, but will do it anyway. He's an extremely influential and, as we all know, persistent HIV prevention advocate. He's a senior advisor at AVAC, where among the many other things he does, he also directs the Choice Agenda Project. Jim, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. This has been, what a great hour. Like every hour, I find myself tuning in and then I can't step away. I feel like I've been to about 4 conferences today and have loved it all. So really, really wonderful. This last hour was great. As Bridget said, my name is Jim Pickett. I'm a longtime HIV prevention research advocate. I am not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any letters before or after my name. But I've done a lot of work around advocating for rectal microbicides and rectal microbicide research and PrEP. And then personally, I've been involved in HIV research. I'm living with HIV. I tested positive in '95. And the way I was able to access medication in the beginning, when I needed to start accessing medication, was through clinical trials. And I actually tested an early protease inhibitor like we heard in this last testimonial. So really excited about this next hour. Please make sure you are taking action. This is all about encouraging us to see the value and remember the value in HIV and AIDS research and letting our elected officials know, letting our communities know, stressing how important it is to keep this and save this. So please take action. We have a number of ideas on our page. One that's especially important to me is the People's Declaration, which is a very much community-centered kind of screed or a testimonial that you could sign on to and support. Please take a look at that as well. But without further ado, I'm really excited to bring forward our first guest, if they are ready. Tonia Poteat. Yes, Tonia. You know, it's early here in Chicago, and I was like, oh my God, to be ready at 6, I have to be up at 4. But to be up for Tonia Poteat, like, and then talking about such an important topic, never more important than now, trans inclusion in HIV research. So please, we have some time to hear from you. And then if we have a little bit of time after you're done with your talk, we'll take some questions and address the chat. So it's over to you, Tonia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. I am very excited to be here. And I tried to make my remarks actually relatively short because I really do want to engage in conversation. I think at this moment in time, it is absolutely crucial that we talk about the importance of trans-inclusive life, not just trans-inclusive HIV research. So that is why I'm going to be brief and just start with why we do this work. I think all of us who do HIV research, and myself who does HIV research and does it in partnership with trans communities, we do it because we care about each other. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the science. But scientists do this work to try to develop ways for people to stay HIV free and for people living with HIV to live long and healthy lives because we care about each other. And then we understand that none of us are free until all of us are free. And I think as a country and as a world, we learn that lesson over and over again. Globally, I think people have probably already talked on this live stream. Unlike Jim, I'm not able to stay up 24/7, so I've missed some of the talks, but probably talked about the goals for 95, 95, 95 that was set by UNAIDS. So globally, the goal is for 95% of people to know their HIV status, 95% of people who know their HIV status to be on treatment, and 95% of people on treatment to have a suppressed viral load so that people can live long, healthy lives. And we know that there's been a lot of progress in that arena, but that progress has left some people behind. And we know that based on some of the most recent systematic review, meta-analysis, collection of data around HIV prevalence among transgender people. So what I have on the screen now is some of the most recent data we have on HIV prevalence among transgender people. And you can see that prevalence of HIV, the number of people living with HIV who are trans feminine, is quite high. And where you see the odds ratio, that means that compared to cisgender people, transgender women have 66-fold odds of living with HIV, which is astronomical and one of the highest of any population. And then we see similar disparities among trans men, where the prevalence is almost 3% and the odds ratio is almost 7. So we know that HIV research, HIV care and treatment, HIV prevention is something that would benefit trans communities. And we know, based on the UNAIDS global strategy, that we have to involve communities. And specifically, they say civil society, community-led organizations, and that they be involved in the design and implementation of interventions. And interventions are usually built on research, so they must be involved also in the design and implementation of research. And it is very early for me, so words aren't coming easily even after my coffee. So the work that most of us try to do, and that I try to do, is make sure that we build our research on a foundation of connection to community, that they help us know what is important to research and how it's important to do it. Because without community, we don't have research, we don't have results, and we don't make progress in the science of preventing HIV and caring for people with HIV. So one of the things that I did when one of the first studies that I did when I moved to North Carolina a few years ago was to try to understand the community around me. And we did a needs assessment where we asked people in the community who were trans what their priorities were in terms of their health. And we left them open-ended questions. And you'll see that none of the answers to those questions, or the top 5, were HIV. They were preventing violence, harassment, and bullying as the very first priority, which tells us a lot about how trans people are treated in our society, that the number one priority is preventing something that none of us should have to experience. The second was safe, affordable housing, which is a foundation for any kind of access to health and healthcare. And then the bottom 3 were really about gender affirmation, insurance coverage, access to providers who provide gender care, and access to gender affirming and gender congruent identity documents. So safety and gender affirmation were the key priorities for the community. And the community has told us over and over again what they need. This was an article that was published in the Journal of International AIDS Society, written by, led by trans people, that said the future of PrEP, HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis, or HIV prevention among trans women, is gender affirmation. And it needs to be engaged, it needs to be practiced in research and in clinical practice. So one of my friends and colleagues and co-conspirators is Sari Reisner. And he and I had been talking a long time about how there needed to be more research and better research with transgender people. He and I both have been doing this kind of research for a long time, but usually with small grants. And so we approached the HIV Prevention Trials Network, which is an NIH-funded giant network that funds large, impactful studies. And I think a lot of the studies that have been talked about here have been funded by the HPTN. And over the course of several years, we advocated for the HPTN to devote specific resources to a study focused exclusively on transgender people. We know you've heard about all of the amazing innovations that have happened in HIV prevention and HIV treatment and in implementation science. And in most of those studies, if trans people were engaged in those studies, we didn't know that they were there. They were invisible. Nobody collected that kind of information. And if they did, there were very small numbers of people. So we didn't know if the experience of the large average group of people actually worked for transgender people. So it was important to have studies and research focused specifically on transgender people. So as we were designing the study, there's a very important process of community engagement that happens with all the HIV prevention trials network studies. And we engaged in that process. And we took it a little bit further. It was important to me that as a cisgender person, I wasn't the only person leading how this project was implemented. So Sari Reisner is openly trans and was the co-protocol chair with me on this study. We implemented an evidence-informed, peer-led intervention. So the people implementing the intervention were also trans and of the trans community, and that was really critical, and I'll get to that when we get to the results. It was important to us that trans people were involved in the protocol development. There were several in-person and online meetings where we tried to pull the original protocol together for how we were going to implement this study, what was going to be done, how it was going to be done. And then we took that protocol to the sites that were engaging in the study, and we met with trans people in the community, in person, face-to-face, and said, here's the protocol, what do you think about this? And it was so important to do that. One, they got to meet us and see that we were real people and that we cared. And that's why we were doing this. And we got to hear from them in their own words, honestly, what they thought. And what they told us was the way you have this designed, which was a very rigorous randomized controlled trial where half of the people got the intervention and half of the people didn't. And they're like, that's not going to work. We are not, as a community, going to support this approach because it feels like half of the people are being denied an intervention. And we had to go back to the scientific committee because there's many levels of approval and negotiate a way to approach doing the study that worked for the community and contributed to the science. And I learned a lot from that process. And I think that's a process that's really important and that all of us who do HIV research and any kind of research can learn from in terms of how to move forward a community engaged research project. So, oops. I think I have slides that have somehow disappeared. The next slide was going to describe what the actual study was. So that study looked at comparing one group of people who got gender-affirming hormone therapy and peer support co-located with where they were offered HIV PrEP. And the other group of people got referred out for gender-affirming hormone therapy, and PrEP was on the site at the site. So we're looking at co-location, giving these things together, kind of a one-stop shop, along with the role of peer support. Importantly, when the sites were getting ready to begin enrolling people in the study, all of them had training in how to be gender affirming. All of them had to engage with the community and develop plans for real linkages to gender affirming care, not just like, oh, across the street, you can go get that, but how are they going to facilitate that kind of care? And the environment needed to be welcoming to transgender people. And I think that is really important in terms of the results that we found. So when we looked at the people who got the intervention in the first 6 months, oh, I forgot to say this. This was a wait list design is what our final design was. So half of the people got the intervention for the first 6 months. And then for the next 12 months, everyone got the intervention. So there was nobody who was denied the intervention. And what we saw in those first 6 months, that PrEP engagement was high. In most studies, we had seen that about 12 to 15% of transgender women were engaged in PrEP, who could benefit from PrEP. And in this study, we saw about 70% reported taking PrEP on a regular basis, and about 50% were laboratory confirmed. So we knew that we had much higher rates of engagement in PrEP than we saw in other studies. And we knew that that was actually good sign. On the face of it, it could be, your study showed that your intervention didn't work. What the study showed to us was that if you provide an affirming environment with or without co-located hormone therapy, that transgender people have the support and the environment that they need to benefit from PrEP if they choose to take it. And I think that's a really important lesson for us, that providing that kind of environment, even if you can't provide every single service at your site, is really important and tells us a lot about the flexibility that we can have in providing HIV prevention for people. So that study, I will say that study ended. And we were in the process of writing up the results when the funding for this particular study was terminated. And I had an animated slide that's no longer animated, but behind the little canceled thing is a study that was called together that Sari Reisner was leading. Because I showed you the first slide, which was really about intervening in providing appropriate HIV prevention for transgender women. And this study was specifically focused on providing HIV prevention for transgender men. It was a beautiful, elegant, factorial design study that Sari and the rest of us who were on the team had invested a great deal of time and effort into, and were just getting off the ground when this was canceled. So we lost the opportunity to really learn what would work for transmasculine people that might be very different than what we saw as working for transgender women and trans feminine people. And we've also lost the ability to the support for moving forward the science of publishing and sharing the results of the study that we saw with transgender women. And that is so, so, so important. And we saw all of that because from the first day that the new administration took office, their very first priority was erasing the existence of transgender people. And you can't erase people and support their well-being and their lives. So it's really, really important when we think about advancing HIV research and advancing HIV science that we understand that the context in which it takes place is incredibly important. So advocating for human rights is a way to advocate for people's health and a way to move the science forward. And just getting back to why we do this work, we belong to each other. This is one of my favorite quotes by Gwendolyn Brooks. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. So I am not happy and well if I know that other human beings are suffering. So we are in this together for each other. And I found this quote online, and I think it's so true, and it speaks to our time right now. We should care for each other more than we care for ideas, or we will end up killing each other. And I worry that we are in a place where ideas, rather than real human people, are what's separating us. And if we can return to caring for each other, investing in each other, investing in HIV research that prioritizes the well-being of all communities and communities most impacted by HIV, then we move the science forward, we move our health forward, and we care for each other in ways that remind us that we are human. So I just want to acknowledge way more people than can fit on the slide, but I did want to acknowledge the HPTN that did invest in this research before it was canceled. This photo is from our community consultation in Rio, Brazil. So amazing collection of trans people and researchers that came together to talk about this study. And I want to thank you for your time. I really look forward to the kinds of questions and comments that you have. I know that
Thank you for such beautiful work, such important work, and your comments at the end. We are in such unhappy and unwell times, and we really have to work and lean on each other and remember why we're doing all this. I think your point about ideas, us valuing ideas over each other, is so spot on. We have about a hot minute or two. Not a lot. We have to keep this baby moving. It's 6:20 in Chicago, almost. Beautiful Chicago. You're getting a lot of love in the chat. And yes, to Jenna's point, what a great place to end the presentation. I think I just want to give you 1 second, Tonia. You and I, we're not trans people, but we're both allies or comrades, or we try to be in our own ways. You as a researcher and advocate, me as a persistent loudmouth. And so while we're seeing just the decimation of trans involved research and programming and services, what do we need to be doing first as allies and comrades to be changing this narrative?
I mean, it's going to sound...
it's not an easy question.
No, but it is. Actually, listen to trans people. I mean, I feel like that is like what I need to do every day, and then take that guidance and move forward with what the community wants and needs.
My God, this is why you are one of my favorites of all time. Really, you are such a hero, and that is it. Listen to trans people. And we can also take that, edit, and change it to whatever population we're thinking about. Let's start there. Listen and follow community. Let community direct us, not us do the other thing around.
Absolutely.
Yes, Greg Gonzalez, listen to trans people. And on repeat and listen. So with that, Tonia, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. We're going to keep this program running. We have a quick testimonial to play, and then we're going to bring up our next guest. So let's have that testimonial.
My name is Faye Landsman. I'm a laboratory specialist with the ACTG Lab Center at UCLA. I've worked in HIV research for 34 years, but HIV research has affected me far more personally than professionally. When I met my husband 32 years ago, there were no treatments effective for HIV. He had already been living with HIV for 4 years. He started using antiretrovirals in 1997, and in 2000, despite not knowing how long the medicines would keep working or what side effects he might have, we got married. We celebrated our 25th anniversary in February. The early 1990s were awful. I lost so many friends. I never dreamed I would have him for so long, and I am so grateful to all of my colleagues who have dedicated their careers and their lives to making my life possible. Without HIV science, my life as I know it would not be possible.
Incredibly, incredibly moving. And I hope this moves you to take action. You can share your story with us, like Faye shared her story. There's a URL there on your screen. If you go to our website, you can also take action in all kinds of ways. There are calls you can make, Congress people to write letters to. And yes, it's important to write to our Congress people, even if they're on our side, even if they know we know where they stand. They need our pressure, pushing them to do the right thing. So do not forget to do that. We have several more hours to go. I would love to bring forward our next guest, Dr. Kristine Erlandson, zooming in from Colorado, which is earlier in the morning here in beautiful Chicago. So great to see you, Kristine. I just want to note sort of something funny from my own personal experience. I've been living with HIV since 1995, and I had no thought, or I never thought I would make it this long, right? I never thought I would make it to age 40 when I found out, because everyone who found out in the 80s and 90s, we lived for a few years and that was it. And I've been a longtime HIV prevention research advocate, and it only dawned on me a few years ago. Maybe I caught a glimpse of myself in like a mirror and did a jump scare, and I'm like, oh my God. Aging, HIV and aging, this thing that everyone is talking about more and more and more, I'm in the aging cohort. So I really did not fully see that in myself for so long, and I work in the field, so it's kind of crazy. Just want to admit that. I'm 59, so I'm going to be paying close attention to everything you have to say. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Please feel free to fill in your bio, and I hope we'll have a few moments on the other side to get some Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. And as you heard in the intro there, I'm going to talk about what aging with HIV means in 2025. And I think that testimonial just prior is also an excellent example of how people are now living much longer. In fact, the majority of people with HIV in the US are now aged 50 or older as a result of some of our research, progression in antiretroviral therapy, but we do continue to see new HIV diagnosis, so prevention is still a key even in this population. We also know that people who are aging with HIV seem to be aging differently than people who are aging without HIV. And one way that we can think about this is the impact on chronologic compared to biologic age. So if you look at these two cars, they were manufactured in the same year, but when one car sits outside and is exposed to the elements, has chronic weather exposure, and maybe doesn't have nice shelter, the aging of this car can be much different. And the car on the right certainly appears more worn and rusted and markedly older. And this reflects more of what we think of as the biologic age, or the impact on the environment on someone's aging, compared to their chronologic age, or what happens on their driver's license. And many other factors can contribute to this aging process in people with HIV, both HIV virus itself, structural inequities, as you can see listed here, biobehavioral factors like substance use, low physical activity, or poorer diet. And from our research of many, we know that these factors may contribute to what we see as an accelerated or accentuated aging process in people with HIV. In fact, several different studies have shown that we see an increasing burden of different comorbid conditions in people with HIV, including high rates of high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, diabetes, and several different forms of cognitive dysfunction, as well as mental health and many other conditions that we can think of. Importantly, we've also seen more recently that people who are aging with perinatally acquired HIV also experience an increasing comorbid disease burden. You can see in this study, based on people who were either perinatally infected or acquired HIV as a young child or in adolescence, that there's a fairly high rate of many different comorbid conditions, starting in the early 20s or even into the early 30s, including things like low bone density, cardiovascular disease, and neurologic complications, things that we wouldn't even think about in a 20 or 30-year-old usually. And all of these things kind of start to make us think about maybe we need to treat people's comorbidities or prevent people's comorbidities differently when they have HIV. For example, cardiovascular disease, we know it's about 50% higher in people with HIV. We know that it's one of the leading non-AIDS causes of death, and that we see cardiovascular events even when we have fairly low suspicion for cardiovascular events based on things like a cardiovascular risk score. And the research that we gained from Reprieve really illustrated how we need to think about aging and kind of prevention of cardiovascular disease differently in people with HIV. I'm sure many in this call are familiar with the Reprieve study, but it randomized over 7,000 people to pitavastatin, a lipid lowering medication, or a placebo, and we saw over a 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease in people receiving this pitavastatin, even if we didn't think that they were at high risk for cardiovascular disease. So one example of ways that we might think about treating HIV differently. And in fact, this led to changes in our HIV treatment guidelines for cardiovascular disease prevention. Another example is gait speed, or different measures of physical function. Something as simple as how fast that you can walk across the room encompasses lots of different things, your balance, your cardiovascular endurance, and it's strongly linked to morbidity and mortality in people with and without HIV. The multi-center AIDS cohort study, very large study funded through research over the last 40 years now, I think, compared gait speed changes over time as people age, and men without HIV shown in this blue line and men with HIV shown in the red line. And what you can see is that gait speed starts to decrease at a faster rate in people with HIV, starting at about age 50, suggesting that we really need to focus on prevention of things like this in people with HIV, starting at an earlier age, and really thinking about how we can preserve gait speed and functional measures with aging. So much of the focus of HIV care over the last 20 years has been on this HIV care cascade that you can see in the upper corner. We have a goal of having 95% of people with HIV diagnosed, 95% on treatment, and 95% suppressed. But I would like to propose that with research, with ongoing support, we can get people to 95% of their, or even higher, of good health-related quality of life. So one important component of that is how we can prolong the health span. So different than the lifespan, but the health span focuses on the time before someone goes on to develop comorbidities. And this is probably a really important part of how we can promote health-related quality of life. So someone comes along in this blue line, they're living at a very high level of function, had no comorbid conditions really until just prior to their death. So they can live this long, healthy life. In comparison, someone who has a lower health span may develop comorbidities each year of their life and have a pretty rapid decline in their function, living with disability for a good portion of their living years. So there's been a growing interest in using something called the geroscience approach to how we think about aging. Geroscience is the study of lots of different mechanisms that underlie aging and impact essentially all chronic conditions. The geroscience hypothesis then is that if we can target these multiple different aging processes, then we can have an impact on chronic disease onset and improve the health span. And this is a different way of thinking than many of our comorbid conditions, where we're really focused on diabetes as related to glucose, cardiovascular disease as related to cholesterol or high blood pressure. But instead, we think that chronic inflammation, changes in the genes, telomeres, all of these different processes may impact all of these aging processes. And so if we can slow some of these basic mechanisms of aging, then perhaps we can prevent diabetes, prevent cardiovascular disease, and prevent many of these other conditions. Interestingly, this was a figure that was presented in an HIV journal, and you can see how closely many of the processes that underlie HIV or that we see in HIV actually mirror what has been proposed as these primary aging processes in people with HIV. So we know that there's changes in the gut or dysbiosis that probably underlies some of the aging process, and these same changes occur in people with HIV. There's issues with mitochondria in general aging, and we know that there's lots of different impairments that happen in mitochondria in people with HIV. So a lot of parallels between aging and HIV. In fact, several different studies have shown this through research over the years. I won't go through these in detail, but we see changes in epigenetics, changes in telomeres, and again, many different studies that show an impact on changes in inflammation and gut and other basic biologic factors of aging. So importantly, how do we measure aging? We hear lots in the research field about things like what we call the omics or epigenomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, all these lab-based markers. But there's also simple things that we can do to measure aging that are meaningful to people on a daily basis, such as how fast they can walk across the room, how fast they can rise up from a chair, physical characteristics like muscle mass or body composition. And this is where most of our research has been focused. So we can think about biomarkers of aging in many different ways. Importantly, we can also think about interventions to treat aging. In geroscience, interventions aren't anti-aging drugs. We're not at that point where we're searching for the fountain of youth necessarily, but we want to try to shift the curve of when people are going on to develop intervention or going on to develop comorbid conditions. So in this figure here, you can see that people aging with HIV probably develop these comorbid conditions earlier. And not only do we want to shift them back to quote unquote normal aging, but we want to decrease that curve so that people aren't developing so many comorbid diseases until they're much older and can actually experience a young and healthy life. These interventions don't have to be toxic medications or things like that, but things like antiretroviral therapy, smoking cessation, things that we think of that we know can actually help to promote aging. And our group has been most interested in exercise as kind of an anti-aging therapy or something that we know that can prolong the health span. We've tested in prior research studies funded by the National Institute on Aging, the impact of aging or of exercise in a couple different studies. I'll highlight just one of these here. You can see in the figure on the right, people with HIV and a control population of people without HIV. In this study, we looked at people age 50 or older who had HIV or not, and were not previously exercising for at least the last 3 months. As you can see in the figure on the right, the two bars, the people with HIV and the control population, had very similar improvements. And so we see that people with HIV respond nearly as well to an exercise intervention if not better than people without HIV. In fact, the 400-meter walk, the stair climb, and the VO2 max, those tests that are shown with the brackets, we saw that people with HIV actually had better responses to exercise. We're currently just finished up another study where we looked at high-intensity interval training to see if that could lead to more improvements. But these studies help us to develop specific exercise recommendations. We know that exercise is now safe and effective in people with HIV. Hopefully it can help to prolong the time before people develop comorbidities in future research. So certainly there's some people who can't exercise to a high enough intensity, or maybe they need something added to their exercise to help to overcome additional impairments. So there's been a lot of interest in other geroscience-based therapies. So what else can we use to help to target aging or to help with comorbidity prevention, ideally combined with exercise? Some of these are common therapies that we use in practice on a regular basis, like metformin that's used for diabetes. Others impact the immune system, such as the senolytics or rapamycin. Rapamycin is actually a transplant medication, or related to a transplant medication, but there's been a lot of interest in the aging literature to use this in very low doses to prolong aging. The senolytics are actually something that we're going to be studying, hopefully in the next month, within the ACTG through a study called 5426 or IPACE. And this is using this anti-senolytic drug to try to get rid of aging cells that may sit in the immune system and kind of clog things up. And we think that giving these treatments may actually improve physical function and frailty, as has been shown in some other populations. We've also been, that you can see GLPs are on here as an interest. This is things like semaglutide or tirzepatide. And while we think of these as mostly just weight loss, some of the comorbid disease prevention, there's also some evidence that these drugs may impact in the neurologic system and may slow development of things like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. Through ACTG funded research, we were able to look at this in a study called Slim Liver or A5371. And we were able to actually look at some aging markers in the setting of receiving this therapy, as well as changes on muscle and physical function that showed some promising improvements kind of in the anti-aging space. You can see Reprieve down there at the bottom, and this was a study that focused on some anti-inflammatory pathways to decrease cardiovascular disease. So much has been learned from Reprieve so far. I just looked yesterday and found over 64 publications that have come out of the Reprieve study. So just a tremendous resource for things that we've learned from research in HIV and aging. And then lastly, I'll point up in the upper corner a couple of other studies that have been funded through the NIH recently, through the National Institute on Aging, 5424 study in the ACTG that's looking at estrogen replacement in people who are perimenopausal with HIV, and then the Triumph study that we just started enrolling a couple of months ago, looking at therapies targeting the growth hormone axis. So really important advancements in HIV and aging that have been supported through research. I think it's also important to note the care and services and what happens in the clinic, as these geroscience therapies really aren't ready for real-time use. There's lots of things that we can do to improve the quality of life of people with HIV, including decreasing stressors, including access to care, and optimizing functional capability in the clinic. But first and foremost, we must listen to the needs of people who are aging with HIV. What do they need in the clinic? What barriers are they having in accessing care? HIV clinics are well positioned to expand care that may be unique to people aging with HIV, as many of our clinics include specialists, pharmacy, behavioral, and mental health. And with ongoing funding, we can continue to provide those supports and grow our clinics. Our AIDS education training centers are leveraging some of those types of clinics structures to roll out geriatric care management. And then the HRSA SPINS projects that were recently completed help to advance many other care models for HIV, including a couple here in Denver that I've highlighted, the Dementia Champion Care Program and an Eye Care Program. So in summary, people with HIV appear to be experiencing an acceleration of the aging process, and targeting multiple pathways within the aging process that are impacted by HIV and aging may ultimately delay the onset of chronic diseases. HIV may benefit most from a geroscience approach to expand that health span, and we cannot and should not wait for these therapies. We need to implement aging care and services in our clinics today. We certainly need ongoing funding and support to do so. I'd like to acknowledge a tremendous community of people living with or impacted with HIV, whose passion drew me to this field back in the late 90s. The participants, collaborators, and research funders, just a few that I've listed here that have helped to support our research, but certainly many others. And with that, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
That was a really interesting and informative talk. We have like a minute for follow-up questions until we move on to our next talk. And we'll see if something pops up. But I wanted to ask you, and you started to speak to this in your closing, in your last couple slides, but what are ways in which the research agenda is being directly informed by people living with HIV who are aging? How is that engagement happening? How are elders like myself now, which I never thought I would be, how are we helping to inform the wonderful work that you and colleagues are doing?
Yeah, and I'm fortunate enough to work within the ACTG, where we have a global community advisory board that has weighed in on priorities for what they feel are really important questions remaining in aging. Obviously, there's lots of decisions that go into which of those studies can move forward, and funding issues that have prevented some high priorities from moving forward. But I'd say overall, like the Senolytic study that we'll be doing within the ACTG was one that the community was incredibly interested in moving forward. A lot of our exercise studies have been ones that the community, either locally or through the Global Community Advisory Board, have really emphasized as important issues to them. So the community has been incredibly important in helping us to think about priorities.
And if folks want to get involved, like perhaps people who are not involved with the CAB or something, someone like me, how would I approach getting involved in this kind of research or helping to inform this research?
There's several advocates out there that are huge proponents of this. I just saw Meredith Green post a question, and Meredith has a group called Breathe that's really focused on HIV and aging issues and what are our high priorities. And I'm sure Meredith would be more than happy to have you join the group. It's
Fantastic.
A world, a group around the world that's been focused on issues in HIV and aging. So lots of different questions there.
Beautiful. We'll have to ask Meredith to drop a link in the chat. There may be others who are interested as well and want to find ways to connect. So let's give Kristine another round of applause, virtual or otherwise. Thank you so much for joining us today from the Rocky Mountain state of Colorado. And now we are going to Zoom or live stream across the ocean to Uganda. And we have Phoebe Mbabazi. Dr. Phoebe Mbabazi from Makerere University is going to continue the discussion on HIV and aging. Phoebe, it's so great to see you.
It's great to see you too.
So thank you so much. I am going to step back and turn it over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Phoebe Mbabazi. I'm a local Fogarty Fellow from Uganda, Kampala. It's an honor to present today. Okay. Today I'll talk about sex differences in the prevalence of geriatric syndromes among older persons with HIV in Kampala, Uganda.
Phoebe, do you need assistance with your slide?
Oh, it's okay. Sorry. It's
okay,
fine.
Great. No problem.
Okay, so as a background, persons with HIV are living longer, even in sub-Saharan Africa, because of increased availability of antiretroviral therapy. And a majority of these older persons with HIV are in sub-Saharan Africa. Nearly 4 million are estimated to be over 50 years. However, like the previous presenter has alluded, these older persons with HIV are at a higher risk for age-related comorbidities, such as non-communicable diseases like diabetes and geriatric syndromes, which are really conditions that are common in older persons, such as cognitive impairment, falls, and these greatly affect their quality of life. So most of the information on geriatric syndromes in people with HIV is from high-income countries, and there's really not much from sub-Saharan Africa. So for this work, we determined 6 differences in the prevalence and the factors associated with these geriatric syndromes among older persons with HIV aged 60 and above in Kampala, Uganda. So in Uganda, we consider older persons as those who are 60 years and above. So this is the Infectious Disease Institute where the work was done in Kampala. So we have over 8,000 persons with HIV on antiretroviral therapy. And of these 8,000, over 1,000 are aged 60 years and above. So a big number there. And our ART comes mainly from PEPFAR. So we set up a cohort in 2020 of 500 older persons with HIV on ART, and we saw them annually and would screen for non-communicable diseases like kidney disease, hypertension, diabetes, and then the geriatric syndromes. So these findings were from year 1 of the study, which was December 2020 through 2021. So when the study procedures, we would interview the clients, take their history, take a detailed medical history, record the medications, take their smoking and alcohol use. We took off a blood sample for kidney function, their CD4 count, HIV viral load, took a urine sample, and then screened them for the geriatric syndromes. We screened for functional impairment, frailty, which is really a measure of vulnerability to poor outcomes in the case of stressors. Cognitive impairment, falls, depression, urinary incontinence, and nutrition. So I hope we can see this. So this is part of the results that, yes, that's better, that we obtained. So our median age was 64 years. And most of our participants, 92.2%, were virologically suppressed, which is great. And most of them had been on ART for 15 years, a median time of 15 years. So when we look at the differences between the women and the men, we find that at baseline, before initiation of the ART, men had a lower CD4, which is in keeping with a poor health-seeking behavior for men, especially in our setting. So women had a better baseline CD4, above 200. And women also had a better current CD4 of 700 compared to 554 for the men. Although with the viral load suppression, there was no difference. On the other hand, women had lower income, with about 43.2% having less than $1 a day compared to the men, which would also be expected. And women also had a lower level of education compared to the men. When we looked at the NCDs, it was concerning. We have a very high burden of the NCDs. For example, almost half the cohort has hypertension. But looking at the number of the non-communicable diseases, the NCDs, women were more likely to have more than one NCD compared to men. And looking at the 6 differences in the prevalence of the geriatric syndromes, what was concerning was that almost every one of our 500 participants had a geriatric syndrome. So only 28 participants did not have one. And women had a higher mean number. So women had 3, a mean number of 3 syndromes compared to 2 for men. When we went down to the particular syndromes, women were more likely to report a history of falls. They were also more likely to report cognitive impairment. They had lower physical function, and they were more likely to be frail compared to men. And when we looked at the factors associated with the geriatric syndromes, being female, older age, having a low level of education, being underweight, having 2 or more comorbidities, and a history of AIDS. So patients who had stage 3 or 4 of the HIV were more likely to have geriatric syndrome. In summary, we found a high prevalence of geriatric syndromes among older persons with HIV in Kampala, which is consistent with reports from high-income countries. And 94.4% had at least one syndrome. Women had a higher prevalence of geriatric syndromes despite attaining better immunological recovery. And we think the presence of a higher number of comorbidities, lower income, lower education, which are risk factors for the geriatric syndromes, probably contributed to the higher prevalence that was observed in women. So our way forward, we recommend the incorporation of screening and management of these geriatric syndromes into the care of older persons with HIV, with a particular focus on women. We have set up a new cohort this year that will run for 10 years, in which we will explore the use of shorter screening tools, because these processes are very long. They would last over 3 hours. And there is also ongoing research to explore the high rates of kidney disease in our participants as we advocate for safer ART regimens. And then geriatric medicine is almost non-existent in Uganda. The knowledge gained from here will be utilized in the general population in Uganda. I would like to thank NIH Fogarty that has sponsored the work through the D43, EDCTP, the study participants, study team, and the IDI research department. Thank you.
Interesting talk. Thank you so much. We now have a substantial amount of time for questions and answers for Phoebe or comments. So please feel free to drop that in the chat. I see we have over 50 people YouTubing in right now. But here's one from Meredith Green, and I'll read it out. Dr. Mbabazi, what are some of the similarities and or differences you are finding in Uganda compared to high-income countries? Thank you for that question, Meredith.
Okay, thank you for the question, Meredith. Some of the similarities, one is the high prevalence of these comorbidities. As reported in high-income countries, we are also finding a high prevalence of the geriatric syndromes and the non-communicable diseases in our population. Then a difference that maybe we may be finding when we compare, so in subsequent work, we've compared our persons with HIV to those without HIV. And there we are finding some interesting findings that whereas in high-income countries, the persons with HIV are performing worse in our setting, sometimes the ones with HIV are performing better than the ones without HIV. So for example, we did a study looking at frailty in those with HIV and those without. And normally from literature, we would expect the ones with HIV to have higher rates of frailty. But we found comparable rates of frailty. And what we think could be driving this is that there is a kind of, that persons with HIV are more in contact with the health system. So they are seen maybe on a monthly basis, 2 monthly basis, and they receive medications for, their hypertension is treated, whereas the ones without HIV are not being treated. So that's an interesting finding that we have also observed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great question. I was wondering if you would be able, Phoebe, to characterize some of the impacts of the grant terminations and resources being pulled away from HIV research and HIV program provision, and how that is impacting people aging with HIV in your setting.
Yes, thank you for that. So, like I mentioned, we have over 8,000 persons living with HIV at my institute, that is the IDI, and most of these, the ART that they are on is through PEPFAR. So there was a big scare when we thought that when there were threats of the funds being cut. This is a very huge number of people, and at that time, our Ministry of Health thought that it would be wise to probably incorporate the treatment of these people in the main hospital within Mulago where we are. But the numbers are too high for that care to be integrated into the systems. So that was one. Of course, the people aging with HIV were very worried that their treatment would be cut off. So yes, so one is the treatment. So we've managed to achieve viral suppression. Much of the, majority of the participants were well suppressed, but the fear was, what if there is no treatment tomorrow? Then what happens? Would reverse all the gains. And similarly, also for AIDS research, for example, I'm an early career scientist, and I've been doing a PhD funded through D43. So most of our career scientists are receiving funding through the NIH, and that is very important, of course, to advance research even in our setting.
Thank you for putting some context and some texture to that. It's devastating what we're facing, but I think we definitely have to figure out how to move forward and keep the services going to all people who need them. I know Kristine is still around, and we have some time for a few more questions on HIV and aging. So welcome back to the tent, Kristine. Thank you so much. I don't know if you and Phoebe know each other, but nice way to introduce yourselves now. Kristine, do you have any other thoughts? When you were finishing, were there anything that you were left unsaid that you would like to offer? And while we're listening to or hearing from Kristine, please feel free to drop a question in the chat if you have one.
Yeah, I think Meredith had posted a question earlier on what are some of the biggest research areas to address in HIV and aging. I mean, I think one of the biggest things from my research, which is really focused on exercise and kind of lifestyle modifications, is how do we support people? So many people aging with HIV may have some lack of structural support, may not have access to a gym, may be in food deserts and not able to access healthy food options. And so what are some low-cost ways that we can really optimize healthy aging and help to prevent some comorbidities, not necessarily giving people additional medications? I think the other really important area right now is how are we providing care to older adults with HIV? Many clinics are staffed by HIV providers who may or may not have comfort with geriatric care. And do we have patients go see geriatricians? Do we just treat HIV care and then return people to an internist or a family medicine doc to take care of general medicine issues? So I think it's kind of thinking about how we're structuring HIV care clinics. Many of my older adults with HIV really want to stay in HIV care as it's a place that they feel comfortable. They've got the support system there. So I think ways that we can maximize the HIV clinic and take advantage of the infrastructure that's there to really provide the best care for our patients.
And so that's so interesting. Thank you, Kristine. Phoebe, how does that relate to what you see as the priorities for people living with HIV in your setting? Are there differences? Are there similarities? You want to speak to that?
Yeah, so it's really similar. We have a high prevalence of the comorbidities in our setting. For example, almost half of our participants had hypertension. So similarly, diabetes. So very high prevalence of these non-HIV comorbidities. And for us here in Uganda, geriatric medicine is not really that much developed. Yes, so, and we are hoping that through this work, we can actually be able to contribute to the development of geriatric medicine here. So our comorbidities currently are being managed within the HIV clinics, but the funding for those is not much. So a lot of the times the patients have to be referred to the main hospitals for management of comorbidities. So you'll find someone has to run, maybe I have kidney failure, so I go to the kidney clinic, then I go to the diabetes clinic, which becomes really exhausting for the patients. So we're also looking at ways of incorporating care such that we can have these patients managed within one. Either we get a geriatrician so that they are seen within one institution. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thanks to both of you and to the organizers for setting aside so much time to talk about HIV and aging. I want to remind everyone that this entire live stream is being recorded. So all of these talks and all of this content will be saved and will be able to be used going forward in our education in communities, with our advocacy. Advocacy has never been more important. So please remember to take action. We have a take action link on our website. There are a number of things you can do. You can sign petitions, you can make calls, you can make your voice heard. That is the key thing. And remembering that all advocacy is local. So find ways to do your work. If you're not doing it yet, think of ways to advocate locally and use your energy locally. And that will have ripple effects that go from the national to global context. Thank you again so much, Kristine and Phoebe. We are now at hour 22, and I'm happy to bring on our next host.